What is going on? It's Alex coming back at you with another video, and today we have the top 15 defensive interior linemen in the 2025 NFL Draft. If you are new, feel free to like, comment, subscribe. I'm doing this for every single one of the positions. I want to do a top 30, but there's a particular player that I'm dying to get tape on who I think needs to get a little bit more love, and also with all the people declaring, not declaring, I wanted to get out this list to be able to at least show a representative group of defensive interiors, while also being able to give us some room to be able to study some new guys, and then also be able to make sure that we have the full list. So, super excited for this. Let's get into it. And of course, when I end up talking about how I grade players, you guys should understand how I grade the players. So this is how it gets broken down. Not only is it pretty much a grade out of 100, which is weighed by different categories, but it's also by different tiers. I have about, 75 plus is defensive interior 1. That's a true starter. I think that, most teams can use them. Would prefer it kind of as a defensive interior 2, but I'm not really going to get too picky. That 70 to 75 range is where I'll probably be keeping that defensive interior 2 group. It's actually just a little bit lower weighted than most groups because actually defensive interior is very hard to grade well in for me. It's a pain in the ass. You see, it's a lot less categories, which means I'm not a huge fan of giving, pretty much give me scores to any of these defenders. But tier 3 is that developmental guy, so, not going to be really a full-time starter, but someone who I think throughout progression of their career should be able to grow up and go and develop into that tier 2 or even the tier 1, depending on the system fit and growth curve. And then we actually don't have any in this video, but we have that tier 4, which are guys that I just don't really ever think should really see the field. Maybe they're going to be practice squad guys, maybe they'll be below that, but I do think it does matter for us to be able to at least understand that tier is there, because when I end up doing my top 30, which I do have about 25 of them graded at the moment, we're going to have some shit to talk about with that group. But dream fits, don't take them too seriously. I got a request for me to be able to break down the dream fit a little bit more, and for the time being, I'm going to leave it as is, more so there for enjoyment of understanding, just, quick mental reference based on team needs, as well as just overall where the teams might be trying to draft particular players. It factors my checks and balances system on the particular categories, because I can't put every single category on planet Earth, like work ethic, which is a kind of a gimme category that I've used to have, and it pretty much boosted a ton of players' value to where I thought they got grades that maybe they shouldn't have. But then also, when you look at the frame of a defender, I think that certain guys carry their weight a little bit better than others, and then you shouldn't just look at the height and the weight and then give them a score. Again, another gimme category. So that's something that can seriously influence it factor there for some guys who are a little bit on the smaller side, who will probably be getting much better scores in athleticism, which shouldn't be able to massively overweigh all the other abilities. But other categories that I grade on, which actually makes up the 100% score: pass rush, basically proficiency, moves, etc. Block shedding, that's super duper key for me. I mean, I have it as its own separate category because some guys are really good at pushing the pocket and getting pressure. Some guys are really good at just being able to plug up a hole in the run defense. But I do think that block shedding is one of the most underrated aspects that we look at, and being able to get off a block is super duper key. And I ended up mentioning this as part of the reason why I have block shedding different than pass rush, and technically run defense as well, impact the line of scrimmage. So I do have this potential category I will be tossing in over length usage, which is actually anchor, but I kind of blend that into the impact of the line of scrimmage. Basically, do you win the line of scrimmage battle? Do you push the offensive lineman, or do they push you? So it is key to end up putting that in there, but for right now, it is going to be representative of both sides of the ball. I think in the future, we are going to be potentially tampering with that to be able to see how it would be for pretty much being exclusively for pass rush. Then you got get off in athleticism, acceleration, top speed, strength, etc. Obviously, that's why I have an it factor, because smaller guys will score really well in this category. Bigger guys won't. Bigger guys might have better frames for certain roles, and smaller guys might not. Another reason to have that it factor. IQ, basically, do you know what's going on? Perrion Winfrey is a perfect example of this. This dude could get right through the line of scrimmage, no clue where the ball was. So I think it's super key. You can get through, but you pretty much, if you're having to bet on blind luck to make a play, you're probably not going to be doing too well in the NFL. And then length usage, I do think it's super key. It's a relatively gimme category, but at the same time, length usage is super valuable, because if you're engaging, especially if you have long arms, you're engaging with interior offensive line with shorter arms, you could really dictate how the offensive or how the play is going to go based off of that. But regardless, that's enough of me talking about it. Let's go into our number 15 defensive interior. And actually, before I talk about Yaya Black, I will end up saying this. Darius Alexander's the player who I was dying to watch. My current sources do not have Toledo defensive tape, and there is one that I am representing right now that actually does have a particular game on it, but I don't really think it's representative of what I would want to see out of him. I've seen a couple drives of his capabilities in all 22, and I solely grade on all 22. I can go on YouTube, and then you can go to, I think it's like do a barrel roll. He ends up posting like actual full clips of, normal game tape, but it's going to be pretty much cut up to where you can end up watching the entire team's offensive line versus the defensive line, right? And you could probably end up seeing a game from one of those styles of creators. But for me, I want to be able to have a higher level of integrity. And, I don't really think Bowling Green is going to be the sole game that I want to watch before I end up giving him an actual grade. I will say, though, I do think he would end up being a top 10 defensive interior. I do got to bring that up, but I want to keep it 100 with you guys. I'm not going to bullshit you with some grades. Every single one of these players is going to get their own scouting report. But Yaya Black's awesome. I really did appreciate his overall performance versus Ohio State. Again, C, by the way, that's an adequate score. So keep that in mind. Basically saying his pass rush is a little underwhelming. His run defense is adequate, and then going on from there. But regardless, let's talk about his overall game versus Ohio State. This is a direct scouting report from my notes. It's not designed for you guys to hear, but you guys really like it, and I love the fact that it shows you some content that you can't just read on the screen. And it allows you to walk through play by play. Like, this is literally, as I'm watching a game, I'm just writing these notes down. Again, they're for me. They're not going to be super cute and stuff, but like, imagine if you sat next to me and we're watching a game, this is what I'd be saying. So to start out the game, I ended up not really seeing anything crazy on the first steps or on his first reps. He had a quick swim move, but then ended up falling on his face. I did end up seeing that he ended up hitting the ground a couple times. He has a delayed reaction to the ball being snapped quite often. I said very little push on the pocket, which, a C plus the line of scrimmage was because he's probably a little bit better at run defense. And I ended up saying at the start of this game, he was getting his ass kicked. And to be fair, this is Ohio State's offensive line. A really high threshold, but again, that's more representative of the NFL than if you're watching him versus some bum offensive lines. I ended up watching one of the other guys who is actually my lowest graded defensive interior this year, but I ended up watching him right before this, so I ended up bitching to myself in the notes about watching them back to back. And I said he made a good block shed versus the run, and then ended up missing the tackle for a loss. He has a violent throw by, so basically he throws an offensive lineman away. But it takes a year for him to be able to do it. So timing's a bit off when he uses his block shedding moves. He ends up on the ground a lot, as I said earlier. He's improved noticeably throughout the game with some nice quick wins. He does have some issues when it comes to tackling. Overall, the full journey showed his flashes, but also heavy inconsistencies. But Yaya Black at his size, 6'5", 317, you could use him in a multitude of roles. I do like that about him as well. Relatively explosive for his size, really good there. But, again, versus one of the top offensive lines, there's a reason why he is just, by the way, 65 is the threshold to be, I think 64, is the threshold to be in that developmental tier. So he's like really damn close to being in that practice squad tier. So don't really bet on this guy necessarily being like the king of kings. But if you need somebody to be some relief depth in there, I think he'd do a very, very good job. Now, let's talk about Deone Walker next. This is going to be a hot take. He ended up declaring a true junior, by the way. It certainly catches me off guard a little bit, but we'll leave it as is. Let's talk about his game versus Texas this year. One of my issues with him coming to the year, because he was a bit lower for me as well, and actually his grade stayed pretty much the same, which kind of shows you it's not that he dropped. It's like a lot of other players I thought did a lot better. But one of my issues with him was how tall he stands. And right off the bat versus Texas, and I ended up starting out by saying this. He stands up way too early, and he could end up using his height as an advantage to be at their top pad level, but also be properly leveraged. So a lot of times when you're super tall, and let's just say the offensive lineman's a little shorter, because interior offensive linemen, not necessarily, unless you're facing Andreas Pete, are going to be smaller than Deone Walker, which I've heard he could be up to 6'7" and 3/8. Like, there was that number that was thrown out there, so he could be even taller. But essentially, when the offensive lineman's here and you're here, you could actually end up having be at their eye level and actually have incredible leverage. And that's something that they don't have, which you could end up saying the lowest man wins. They actually have that advantage on him. But if you're talking about someone with 350 pounds on their frame and you have great leverage and are able to lift them to where they have pretty much no foundation in the ground, could be a massive asset for him. But continuing on, his run anchor could be a bit iffy from time to time. He has a good use. He takes advantage of poor angles in pass blocking. So basically, when the offensive line disperses, and let's just say the center kind of gives up a little bit too much room here, that looks so wrong, by the way, but he ends up using that advantage to be able to get, God, it looks so wrong in my head, but he takes advantage of that to be able to get a nice, easy win, which is a very, very good thing, which is why I do have him graded very well as a pass rusher. I said I would like better length usage overall. He does have some quick swim moves, and he ended up actually doing that on Cam Williams, of all people, as well. Also another nice quick swim move, but he does not really have the overall athleticism to make the most of it in a quick throw offense. So let's just say he goes up against the Dolphins, right, where they have a very quick time to throw. He's not athletic enough to take full advantage of the quick win, the way you look at Braden Fisk, who's a crazy athlete, right? Like, he doesn't have that explosiveness, top-end speed to be able to really make it work, which in Texas, when they were throwing the ball quickly, which is why I assume the offensive linemen didn't really pay as much attention to, like, the longevity and the effectiveness of their pass blocking. It ended up being essentially a non-factor. So just keep that in mind as well. So continuing on, he has some really low impact plays, not overly effective on plays that he does not win immediately. He ended up missing a tackle for loss. I said I'm massively underwhelmed. He had some solid plays down the stretch with some quick wins, but it just doesn't really amount to much. So True Jr. coming out, I don't understand why. I think he could have used another year of development, and he just simply didn't. So I'm hoping Deone Walker proves me wrong in this case. I always say I'd be much happier to be proven wrong about a player I'm down on, because good football matters more than being right. I'd rather have a learning lesson and watch an awesome player on Sundays, especially when I say one of my dream fits is the Steelers. Because I do think this guy has a ton of potential, and I think block shedding can improve massively with proper timing. I think his run defense could improve a lot if he just lowers his pad level. And I could totally see his efficiency overall improving a ton if he uses his arm length and he ends up using proper leverage. So this guy has sky-high ceiling, but it's year over year of him just consistently having issues with that pad level and not fixing it. So I do have my concerns. Alfred Collins is next. Really good player, by the way. I don't know why people are saying this guy's a primary run defender. We'll talk about it, but I actually thought he was really effective as a pass rusher. We'll get to it. So this is the game versus Texas A&M, which was, I believe, one of his worst. So he had a flash of upper body strength. He did end up getting driven back. So again, I don't have run anchor in here, but impact of the line of scrimmage does have that factored into it a little bit. I said he stands really tall, needs to lower his pad level. I mean, well, you'll hear when I talk about the offensive linemen, they get on their toes too much, like improper leverage for them. Same thing with defense interior in terms of their pad level, man. Like, a lot of guys need to just learn how to move forward without standing literally sky high. But continuing, he had a nice long arm on the right tackle. He ended up having a deer in headlights rep. So you can see the IQ grade's low. Like, I'm showing you why these reps, why these scouting reports actually influence the grades. I ended up saying he has a flash of block shedding, just took a little bit too long. He is a limited athlete, very limited athlete. I said a lot of poor offensive line play with them disengaging with him with him disengaging from the block rather than block shedding. So there's a little bit of a difference there. You might ask, like, what the hell is the difference? Because I have a good block shedding grade, but that ended up changing throughout the game, and I also watched a couple other ones of him. But regardless, there's a difference between when you go through an offensive lineman, right? Like, you're right here, offensive lineman's right here, and then you can get past them. Versus the offensive lineman's blocking you, you're right here, the running back running over there, and then you just slide off the block. That's not necessarily block shedding. That's just block evading. Does that make sense? That's what I was meaning when I ended up saying that. He ended up showing better shedding ability throughout the game as the game progressed, and that is good, just not very explosive athlete the way I would end up wanting. I'm worried about his situational awareness, but he does have some great flashes. So again, overall, I thought he did a really solid job, and really the IQ is what worries me more than anything, because he can play the run. He also has that shedding ability if more consistent, And I think that that frame, it's something that you could probably bet on as being something nice. So if you're looking for a potential defensive interior 2 that might take a year to develop, this might be your guy. Let's talk about CJ West next. So CJ West is fun. He was on one of my stock reports. He ended up going and like shredding a lot of teams. I think it was like Michigan where he ended up having like 7 pressures or something. But regardless, CJ West, I love showing some love to Hoosiers here and there. But let's talk about his game versus Ohio State. I said not a great start. He did not have very much explosiveness off the bat. Then and he ended up changing, or his play ended up changing. So I ended up showing some push early on. He had some quick block sheds. He ended up missing a tackle for loss. What's up with these defensive interiors, by the way? Just missing tackles. I don't know what's up with that. But continuing, his run anchor has been a little bit iffy, but it's improved as the game went on. His goal line run anchor actually was very good. Good run tackle for loss, showing more explosiveness since the first drive. I will say he can jump gaps, but it does not seem fully calculated. So this is something I end up calling as kamikaze. Kamikaze, I think I might even use that term in this. Pretty much is like, you could call it YOLOing. You just pretty much like fucking gun it without actually thinking what's going on, what's going to happen after. Your goal is just get through the gap. And that's what I think CJ West does a little bit. I love his play, but there are some reps where I'm like, you jumped the wrong gap. Like, you will see the play going left. Like, well, I guess like you guys can see this way. And then he'll jump the gap this way because it opens up a little bit more without really looking past the lineman to see, hey, actually, if I don't jump the gap and I actually just play my specific role, I think it could definitely end up being a better impact on the play. Hence why IQ is a little bit on the lower side. Again, it's not talking about their IQ as a human being. It's talking about their football IQ. So don't get it twisted. But regardless, he does a good job at taking angles. But I don't think NFL guards and centers will have that many or those deficiencies. So again, similar to what I was talking about with Deone Walker, where he was basically, you know, let's just say this is the center and the 2 guards, and the center kind of does that and like angles him from there, and then so you can kind of like get a clear lane between the 2. It's like I felt a little bit more exaggerated than what is going to be in the NFL, so I will say that. But continuing on, he keeps his hands active during the rep. He can take himself out of the play when trying to win the matchup versus the offensive lineman. Remember when I was talking about kamikaze? Like just pretty much going YOLO, not really thinking about what's happening after. He sometimes does that to himself. Even when he's not jumping a gap, he ends up really trying to win the matchup versus necessarily doing what's best for the play. He can give his back to the offensive lineman when trying to shoot gaps, leading to 0 length usage and being put in an awful position to disengage. He has seemed to blindly jump into a gap, into a tackle for loss rather than do it calculatedly. So, bottom line, CJ West, I mean, for his size, again, 6'2", 317, a real plug in the middle with good explosiveness. This is a toolsy player that you really want to work with, but I do have my concerns over the fact that a lot of this doesn't feel very appropriate for the specific play, and it's more so him getting lucky that a play might be right for the exact moves he's doing. So hopefully that changes, but I really do like the fact that this guy at that frame possesses the athletic profile and the proficiency that we've seen. Maybe more time will be needed for him to be able to fully show what he's able to do in the NFL. Then we got Darrell Jackson Jr. This is a Mel Kiper favorite. I know that he was talking about him earlier in the season. He's done a great job, and obviously, as you can see, I like a lot of his game. Like, it's pretty hard to grade well in pass rush and run defense. Like, that is awesome. And so we'll talk about him in a second. We're going to get a little bit of sip of, this is not Mellow Yellow. This is actually Poppy, so it's actually dissing my own sponsor of the show, but you get some free ASMR in there as well. Regardless, let's talk about Darrell Jackson versus Miami. So the only game, so right now, when I ended up grading him, it was the only game for Florida State defense. Ended up changing, woo woo. But continuing, nice extension, which he ended up leading to a block shed by throwing the offensive lineman away. Solid run anchor so far. He's been able to take on double teams, so that's something I noted. Farmer ended up kind of having the single teams. Darrell Jackson ended up having the double teams. Would love better block sheds in the run game. He ended up using a full rip move, so I end up saying flash rip. That's the exact wordage that I actually used, but I end up kind of like being able to note which moves they use in the game because it's good to see what type of tools kit that they do have. His anchor versus the run is starting to show up as a possible weakness, but it ended up just being more inconsistent than anything. He can get stunned by powerful blockers. His leg drive's a little bit iffy. Would like for his hands to be more active and use length a lot more. There is a possible stamina concern. There's zero length usage happening. There's something about how he moves that gives Flintstone vibes. I forget why I said that. I'm going to be honest, but it felt very uncalculated, like not very like efficient movement skills. But yeah, we'll have to rewatch that and then understand why. His pad level got a little too high. The one time he uses length, he ends up getting a sack. Overall, he had some very nice flashes, but I'm not overly moved. So it really comes down to the fact that he's not an overwhelming athlete. He doesn't use his length at all. But the beautiful thing about him is, first off, I don't think he's remotely close to his ceiling. But second off, when you get to see him do the proper rep, essentially, which is, use your length, be able to push the pocket, and then be able to disengage, you see that's very effective. And at 6'5", 330, that is a very positive aspect of his game. And I don't know if he'll be coming out. I don't know his eligibility off the top of my head, so that's on me. But I really do think this guy's super flexible. You could use him as a 3-tech, 0-tech, 1-tech, whatever the hell you want. Continuing on, we got Aeneas Peebles. So he ended up declaring for the draft, which, I kind of expected as well. But let's talk about him versus Miami. So you can actually get a, comp to comp right here of Aeneas versus Darrell. Of course, completely different builds, but great push off the bat. He had a rep at edge and got push on Maui Goa. He ended up using a spin move, solid pad level for his size. Continues fighting with continuous moves, so he stays active during the rep. He does a solid job of using angles to collapse the pocket. He got stiff-armed out of a sack. So actually the quarterback stiff-armed him and he ended up missing the sack. I say he looks tired. There is legitimate endurance questions. Much more explosive than overall athletic. He likes to use the spin move a lot. He has active hands and arms. He had a quick spin that led to a sack. I posted that on my X page. He ended up jumping but did not get flagged. And then he did what the hell? Oh yeah, so he ended up jumping past the line of scrimmage, did not get flagged, so that's good. Not good for him, but good for the overall play. He then did a nice gap jump for pressure. So basically, he did encroach with like a neutral zone infraction, and then he ended up making up for it by being able to generate a pressure by jumping into a gap, which at 6'1", 290 is kind of what you need to do. But continuing on, he can get taken out of the play easily by double teams, kind of indicative of his size. Overall, had some really solid flashes, but will be role specific, which is why I have the 4- when you're 290 or under, especially when you're 6'1" as well. I do have my concerns, but Aeneas Peebles, you could try to see him just like really grow and develop into someone who's going to be a really good DPR designated pass rusher. If it weren't for his size, he would have actually been someone who I think deserves legitimate reps off the bat. Then we got Walter Nolen here. This is going to be a hot one. I already hear it, but I think that a lot of the love, and I love Walter Nolen, don't get me wrong, but we're seeing a lot of like first round hype for this guy. I'm just going to sum it up like this. I really think that it's the product of poor offensive line play a little bit more. Obviously, I'll continue watching more of his games, and then we'll be able to update this throughout time, but this is updated as of now, and I've purposely watched his best games. Very rare that you see me watch players' best games because I like to see why they struggle rather than why they necessarily succeed. And I was very unmoved by Nolen, and I wanted to be moved. I love this guy. Obviously at Texas A&M, I was a big fan of him going to Ole Miss. Someone who I've tried to put a lot higher in mock drafts, and I just couldn't do it. Like, he looks great on the TV screen, but in all 22, I just couldn't buy in. But we're going to talk about two games because I think it's key. We'll talk about Arkansas and LSU. So this Arkansas was a little bit of a short one, but regardless, I said he did a good job throwing a left guard away. He's ending up looking past the offensive guard as well. So basically extension, look past rather than, just lock in, throw him, and then see what the hell's going on. His push is a bit inconsistent. He drove the left guard and then ended up getting a tackle for loss. His leg drive overall is a bit inconsistent. Not going to lie, I was extremely underwhelmed with that performance. So when I have that short of a note section, not a great sign. But let's talk about his game versus LSU because that's where he had 7 pressures. It was one of his best games, but It started off with this. I don't know if I've ever seen a defensive interior get so much pressure from such limited athleticism. It just does not feel translatable. It takes advantage of poor leverage often. He had a nice rep versus Will Campbell with a combination move. It feels more like poor blocking than good defense leading to success. His best rep was as an edge versus Emory Jones. I am so let down. It is really sad. I wanted to love him more. And I try to give this guy as many chances as I can, and I will continue to do that every day until the draft. And I'm praying to God I'm wrong. I'm praying to God that I'm just being an absolute dumbass in this equation, and I know most of you think I will be. So, fingers crossed, you're right. I mean, because again, I really want him to succeed. I don't want him to be a busted first-round pick. I just didn't see it, and I wanted to, and it really didn't feel like, by the way, LSU's offensive interior, I don't know why every defensive interior player absolutely feasts. I don't get it because I actually really liked Dellinger coming into the year. I actually liked Frazier coming into the year. And both of them just are absolute ass cheeks when it comes to these actually talented defensive interiors. And again, Walter Nolen at 9 is a solid ranking. Don't twist it too much. This guy belongs to be able to be developed into a legit every down player. He is 3 points away, 2.5, from being an every down player as a defensive interior too. So please don't get it twisted. I just didn't see it clicking. And maybe his athleticism's a little bit off, but I genuinely tried to watch the best of the best, and I just could not see the athleticism being at the rate that I have seen with the other defensive interiors of this class. It's all above adequate, but I just wasn't fully sold. Rylie Mills is next, and this was surprising to me. I was expecting Rylie Mills not to make this list at all, but let's watch his game versus Florida State, because Florida State has some good offensive linemen, whether they do well or not, that's beside the point. So I ended up saying he started out the game doing nothing crazy, but also nothing worrisome. He uses his leverage well and his leg drive to drive the guard back. He has good disengagement timing after driving the other guard back, so he actually did it to both offensive guards. That's something that's super key, because it's not like you're just feasting on one dude who might just be ass. You're really doing it to both. He ends up getting double teamed a lot, which I guess makes sense when he is 10 pounds heavier than Howard Cross. So again, makes sense. He has a very inconsistent processor. He either kamikazes, which if you guys didn't hear earlier, basically is he's making a move trying to win a rep without really thinking of what's after, or he actually knows perfectly where the ball is. So really weird. So the difference between an F and an A IQ ended up landing on a C right there. It just depended on the play. He pushed the left tackle back for a sack. Tried to spin. It didn't actually end up working, though. He can be a little bit more consistent with his length usage on initial contact. Great use of upper strength to open up a hole and end up making another sack. Straight line speed is overall really nice. He ended up being subbed out early this game. So Rylie Mills really did surprise me. Literally barely away, being sub 300, I wanted to knock that down a little bit. But besides that, this dude actually was a big surprise for me. Again, there's a difference between Walter Nolen, where I came in thinking he's a first-round player, and then Rylie, who I ended up thinking was a UDFA. And it shocked me. It really did shock me. I think Rylie Mills is extremely underrated. Derrick Harmon's next. Derrick Harmon's a good player. I ended up really loving him when he was at Michigan State, ended up transferring to Oregon. But let's talk about his game versus Wisconsin. I said it was a recent performance. It was also a very poor performance. By the way, Wisconsin's interior offensive line, you know how I said LSU's offensive line interior has been allowing defense interiors to feast? Wisconsin's has been holding up in like freaking stonewalling really good defensive interiors. So it's a good test for Derrick Harmon, who's still graded out well versus a very good offensive interior group. So he had a nice block shed off the bat. Good job keeping the legs moving. He did end up getting moved and ended up going off balance. Solid run anchor, solid mover, but nothing insane. Doing a good job with block sheds. He flashed a rip to a spin move. Would like to improve the timing, but it's good to see that it is there. I would say that he is more athletic than explosive, which, well, there you go. It's indicative right there. I've now lost my place. There we go. He really suffers from a lack of explosiveness. I would be surprised to see a good vertical, because everything else is good. Speed, upper strength, and shedding, but the explosiveness is a critical issue. He weirdly seemed low effort during one of the plays that was a reverse. Did I say Kelvin Banks? I said Banks excited me more. I'm tripping balls. My bad. Harmon's a bit more consistent. So okay, well, who the hell am I tripping balls? Like, who am I talking about here? Regardless, let's get past this. It's a player who didn't make the list. It's Caleb Banks. I just realized I watched this guy right after Caleb. I'm like, who the fuck is Banks? I'm like, oh, that's why he's not on this list, because he didn't come out. Okay, my bad. Okay, so I said Caleb Banks excited me more, but Derrick Harmon's a bit more consistent. I'd rock Caleb Banks any day because the high level wins and athleticism beats out the consistency. Don't need to worry about that because freaking Caleb Banks did the right move and ended up going back to school because he's going to be a first-round pick next year. He can end up getting absorbed by blocks. He definitely has some solid plays when he does know it's actually a pass play. So really good overall, actually, for Derrick Harmon. The one issue I really saw was, first off, just basically identifying the play, but most importantly, that get-off, compared to his overall athleticism, was a little bit of a shocker to me. But he's had a fantastic year. Obviously, these grades are really solid, and you can see a good grade sheet still ends up leading to a 70, which is a defensive interior 2 grade, which I always have 75 plus being, whatever position it is, number 2. Then you got Kenneth Grant, KG. So this is game versus Oregon. He's such a smooth mover at his size. He had a great swim move on a stunt for a pressure. He can handle double teams, but would like for him to maintain the anchor through those double teams when fighting through them as well. His anchor is surprisingly pretty poor. Would like for his pad level to remain a little bit lower. Wanting a bit more leg drive when engaging with blockers. He had a good flash of leg drive and a shed, but would like to make the shed quicker though, so timing's a bit off. He has a nice extension to swim move. I ended up saying I'm kind of baffled at how poorly he pushes the pocket. He's overly athletic, has a strong upper body, and is 340 pounds, but cannot push offensive linemen back. Overall, he has had some crazy flashes and unreal potential, but I am worried about this lack of push at his size. Like, honestly, that's the big concern with KG. Like, really great athlete, unbelievable frame, really high motor player, but just cannot generate push on the pocket. Honestly wild to me. Like, I'm just going to be honest. It's something that bothered me in the preseason. It bothers me even more now. Now, let's talk about TJ Sanders. I love this guy. Like, straight up 290. Ended up, of course, dropping him 1 for that because he's 6'4", 290. It's a unique frame. Could have ended up dropping him maybe 1 more. But, I mean, based on the grades, he'd still be the 5th overall guys. Who gives a shit whether it's a 71 or a 72. Let's talk about his game versus Bama, though. So I said pretty solid overall start. He's looking past the offensive line for the ball and the run. He's not daunted by double teams. His spin move seems to be a little slow. He needs to watch out for having too high of a pad level. He ended up getting decked by Proctor, which I ended up putting Caden Proctor, that's the guy Proctor, but I ended up putting that clip on Twitter, and actually Caden Proctor, of all people, liked it, so that's kind of fun. That's why I love Twitter, too. You could just, like, people technically have always a chance to see, like, even Elon Musk, like, he responds to a lot of shit, but nothing of mine. I mean, that'd be kind of cool to get that type of visibility, but regardless, for Caden Proctor being able to, at least add him and then he can end up seeing it, we'll see. A lot of times that's the way that I've gotten guys on my show. People ask me about that a lot. It's like, oh, well, how did you get Marshawn Nealand on the show? How did you get Marcus Bowe on the show? You just post about them. They like something of yours. You follow them. They end up following you back, or else, you just already follow them and you just hit them up in the DMs. And, if you guys really want the recipe, that's how I did it. But regardless, that's beside the point. You end up getting decked by Caden Proctor in the run, and I honestly think Proctor's going to be a top 5 pick next year. So that's not really that big of a negative. As much of a fighter as he is, I wish he would be more assertive, TJ Sanders. Nice push on the center. So Parker Brailsford, Mr. I'm going to be going back to school. He's a center 1 of this class. It is what it is. He can miss his hands trying to get too cute with the first move. That is something I saw. He doesn't always land his hands properly. He does sometimes end up getting himself out of position while trying to finesse his way. So far has been a primary run defender, which is so weird for a sub 300-pound player. He has strong arms, has a solid sense of where the ball is. I said overall, I really like what he brings to the table, but I think he needs to lock in a bit more on certain reps and just say, fuck it, YOLO, and ram a motherfucker. That is verbatim what I said. Yeah, it's just basically assertiveness. I think TJ Sanders gets in his own head about his weight, but his weight doesn't really affect his play. And that's what I love so much. Like, this is an incredible grade, by the way. 72, it's technically a 73. I have that it factor -1. Like, he did a fantastic job. And that's probably why I only dropped it 1, because it actually didn't really affect him. But this dude is a really, really good player, and I did not expect it to that degree. Because you have all these great players on South Carolina, you don't really think too much of a 290-pound defensive interior being probably the highest graded defender on that defensive line that is draft eligible. Hint, hint. Continuing, we got Demonte Capehart. This is the hot one. This is a hot one. The rest of them, I mean, you can kind of understand other people have these opinions too. But I think it was Keith Sanchez who had Demonte Capehart in the first round. And this dude, I was shocked. I honestly was like, all right, fuck it. I'm just going to do it just because I saw him in a first round mock. Like, let's just get us through. But let's talk about Florida State, where who else did I end up grading against Florida State? Rylie Mills. So I guess two guys who I thought did better. Maybe it's Florida State's offensive line that's ass, but I actually thought they're not that bad. Continuing though, he ended up being one of his best graded games, but it also ended up being the game with the most reps. So wanted to see what's up. I said there's nothing crazy so far. He's not a super flashy athlete. He has a great bull rush on the pocket. He had nice push then disengagement versus the run. He needs to continue pushing with his legs, can have a hard time pushing the pocket if the initial pop does not knock their anchor. He's flashing some better athleticism as the game goes on. He ended up popping Washington, who's the left tackle, who actually should be an interior offensive lineman, but we'll leave it there. Nice push on the guard he ended up swatting the ball after that as well. Very solid run defender so far. Great extension vision and tackle for loss versus the run. So that's why I'm saying, like, you look past the offensive lineman. So he ended up going like that, ended up pushing aside, and then ended up making the tackle for loss. He could be lethal if he combos a bull rush with disengagement quicker. The best bull rush in the country. Ended up saying that. Excellent pass rush with a bull rush. I wish he could combo it and to get insane wins, but he can definitely improve on that. But NFL guards might not even be able to handle this powerful of a bull rush. So super exciting to see where he's going to go. -1 for the quantity of reps because he just doesn't have a ton of them. But Demonte Capehart really surprised me. I mean, like, really surprised me. And at 6'5", 315, I'm perfectly happy taking him in day 2. I think he will get taken in day 2 because the people who really watch him really like him. And it's just like the stats don't add up. They really don't. So I'm super excited to see what he's going to do at the next level. But I think the reason why he doesn't have those stats necessarily is because he doesn't disengage in proper time, which that's okay. That's something you can learn a lot better than, you know, whether you can or cannot, right? The timing is something that is a little bit more intricate. Tyleik Williams is next, though, at number 3. I love Tyleik Williams with a passion, man. I mean, this guy is a freaking beast. Let's talk about him versus Oregon, though. He had a great get off and push in zone off the bat, or in zone run off the bat. He had a swim past Harper. He detected a quarterback sneak and adjusted to help stop it. So I actually love this. He was lined up in a particular gap, ended up realizing that Dillon Gabriel moved up, and maybe this is what the coach tells him. But it didn't look like anybody else adjusted what they did the way Tyleik Williams did. So really love that about him right there. So he is very hard to block, especially versus the run. He's hauling ass the whole play as well. Quite conservative as a pass rusher. I don't know if that is by design, but he has shown a lot more physicality as a run defender. So it's not like he does not have that physicality. He has a very solid run anchor so far. I feel like he's more so containing than rushing on pass downs. Leg drive is just not happening on pass rush downs versus the run. I cannot understand why. He has an excellent motor. He actually ended up having a coverage rep, so I ended up saying they sent this mofo into coverage. And then I said, there we go, nice push on the pocket on a passing down. So he ended up similar to what I was talking about. Who did I end up giving a thing saying, like, he finally used his, like, length and ended up pushing? I'm trying to remember who I ended up saying that about, but I think it might have been, was it all the way up with Deone Walker? Regardless, like I was talking about, maybe it might have been Alfred Collins, but when a player uses his length properly, and it's Darrell Jackson. Yeah. So with Darrell Jackson, it's like when you use your length properly, it's just you see the flash of what you can be. And it's like, okay, well, it's there, right? Like you at least show that it's possible. And I love that. That's why I saw with Tyleik Williams. I'm like, I could easily give you a D or an F in pass rush. But I saw that play and I'm like, I believe that's replicable. And I really think Ohio State doesn't know how to use their defense properly. Hot take. But I really think they have more talent than what they actually show out on the field. And they do a damn good job. But it is what it is. I'm going to hold my tongue on that. We're here to talk about Tyleik Williams. So, ended up saying he has some awesome quick wins. He shot a gap and ended up missing the tackle for loss. And I said, you could tell he's reserving his energy or his scheme to contain on certain pass downs. Big fan overall. He's still my defensive interior 2, most likely. So, I really did expect for him to be my defense interior 2. Caleb Banks, FYI, would have been defensive interior 4. So, again, I'm a little bit pissed about that because I really like Caleb Banks, but it's understandable. I want a full draft cycle of me loving him. This is going to be the guy who caught me really off guard. Omarr Norman-Lott. This guy's a beast. Let's talk about his game versus Georgia. It was one of his higher rep games because the dude has, I think, under 500 reps on his career. He has crazy get off, very solid anchor and feistiness. I said, okay, I get the hype. Like off the bat, I was like, all right. He's able to hold up to a double team. Great run defense, looking past the offensive lineman for a tackle. Did I miscolor that? Son of a biscuit. Y'all know I always miscolor one thing. I'm like, Continuing though. Push on the pocket is solid, not insane. He's a very good athlete. Very heavy rotation. The get off is unreal. Would like quicker block sheds. He needs to simply shed sooner because I just saw him do it. Good job taking a weak angle on the guard. So there's not going to be a ton of tape on Omarr Norman-Lott, but he's going to be at the Senior Bowl. I could see this guy being a first round pick. Like legitimately, this guy is that damn good. Super excited for him because, you're going to get a raw defensive interior player who's a freak athlete who has all the potential in the world, but it's not just like, oh, he has tools. Like, no, you actually see it in action. So, really do like that. Like a punchy player that's a good run defender, sign me up. And I think you guys would be down for that as well. And of course, like who the hell else is going to be my number 1 overall defensive interior? It's Mason Graham, who holds the title from literally back when I first did this, but his play improved noticeably this year. Let's talk about him versus Oregon. He ended up being pancaked off the bat from a side block. Pretty much a guard came in and just popped him. Solid push in the pass rush, but less versus the run. Good hand fighting, tried to bend around Connerly and ended up falling, which, this guy ain't no edge rusher, so I'm not really expecting him to be able to bend like that. Nice swim move and adjusted to end up making a tackle for loss. I want more combos rather than just quick swim wins. Great job swatting the hands of Johnny Cornelius on the way to the quarterback. He can end up losing track of the ball. Third time he ended up being on the ground. So he ended up being on the ground multiple times this game. He has some dominant quick wins, but man, I want to see more combinations. So, quick wins are amazing. Like something you need to have if you're going to be an effective, consistent pass rusher in the NFL is being able to get past the offensive lineman within a second, right? And being able to do it within like half a second or even shorter is amazing because you really are going to blow up the play at that point. And Mason Graham has that. But what I'm talking about is like, hey, if that doesn't exactly work, are you able to be able to stunt properly and be able to combine moves to be able to get around offensive linemen that aren't susceptible to quick wins? That's going to be the difference between a really good defensive interior and an amazing defensive interior. And that's something you can develop 100%, but it's also something that's worth noting because, he doesn't have that ability at this point. So continuing on though, he has great explosiveness. I don't know about any sort of bendability, which, again, you don't really need that. He needs to watch his pad level because he can get caught being straight up, which I assume leads to his inconsistencies with his push on the pocket. He has some reps where I see blue chip pass rushing potential, then reps where he gets completely shut down. I think the inconsistencies are worth dealing with if you have a legit star defensive interior 1, which I think Mason Graham will eventually be a defensive interior 1. I think that's going to be the role for him going forward. But I also admit that he right now will have some flashes early on, but but he'll also have some disappointments because he does have that level of inconsistency. But that's going to be the video. Thank you so much for joining me on this, 40 minute adventure. And, super excited to be able to create the 2-hour version of this when we end up recreating this with all those defensive interiors. So very excited for that. Thank you so much for watching. I love you. See you on the far side. Peace.